I'm concerned about the Supreme Court, and I've kind of put that information up on my YouTube site, and I've kind of sent information out to people to remind them that the reason why this election is so very, 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 very important is that four of the Supreme Court justices are over age 70. The other two are just about to be over 70. And they're not going to be in office much longer. The next president is probably going to be the one that's going to be appointing the Supreme Court justices. That should concern you very much.
I agree. I agree. I mean, we really need to look. I mean, the Supreme Court being the the highest court in the land is very important, and I think we disregard that because I know when we went through the whole Clarence Thomas situation, and it was kind of they were concentrating on less on the importance of certain people holding that position and more on the whole scandal that he was involved in, but.
Right.
In terms of knowing the political process or the process within the justice system, the highest court of the land, we really need to understand the fact that the next president is going to be appointing the next few justices.
And probably about 5 or 6 of them. Matter of fact, the oldest one is 89 years old. And someone said that he's holding on so the Bush doesn't have a chance to replace him.
Oh, bless his heart.
Now, I want to kind of, and this is your education right here, because a lot of you don't follow what's going on in the Supreme Court. Lorie thought I was a little weird. She said, did you read it in the book? I said, no, I just look at the Supreme Court because I want to see what they're up to. I mean, if you had somebody that can change your life at the drop of the hat, wouldn't you want to know what they're doing? Well, so I looked at a couple of cases, and me and Lorie are going to talk about a few of those cases, because I just want you to get a taste of what's going on here and understand that sometimes everything is not as straightforward as it seems. The first case I want to talk about is a ruling that just came down dealing with this whole idea of selling cigarettes on the internet. It was dealing with this particular company that decided they were going to transport cigarettes after they were bought on the internet, and the state of Maine decided that they had to determine before they delivered the cigarettes if they were actually grown people that could buy these cigarettes, because they want them selling to minors. You have child issues and smoking issues and stuff like that. And the Supreme Court said that no, they couldn't do that. And there's like 30 other states that wanted to join in on this, and the Supreme Court ruled against them, saying that no, you can't do that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you understand the whole federal versus states laws, and in history we've had that go on. Unfortunately, the federal law is enforced when it's in a certain interest, because we know from the civil rights era that a lot of things that weren't supposed to be going on the state level went on in terms of discrimination, and even the Brown versus Board of Education ruling. It was like everyone said, well, with all deliberate speed, the states can implement the integration of African Americans into the school system, but it was pretty much like, okay, we know what the federal law is, but the states, they can do it when they're ready. So it's a selective process.
Right.
But I understand the idea behind the ruling. I don't know how you would try and track. I mean, we know that with the internet being as popular as it is, how you would be able to track whether it's going to a minor or not. So that was interesting to even be brought up, because nowadays you constantly have that issue with who is on the other end of the internet.
Well, they were trying to force and they had some type of program that was set up that they would be able to certify that they were getting the products out to the right people, whatever. And so this was an issue of commerce. That the federal government is the one that decides commerce and rules and regulations and stuff, and it didn't matter if it superseded the common good of children's health. And I said to myself, that didn't make any sense. And then you brought up an excellent point, saying that when they make these decisions, they're looking at something a little bit bigger than just what we look at. Yeah,
I mean, they have to look at precedent. They have to look at whether or not this is going to cause immediate problems where people are going to go back and start, lawsuits are going to be filed over things that have happened in the past, and plus it being a precedent for the future, whether or not this is going to be a major economic issue, or whether it's going to flood the judicial system with a whole lot of lawsuits, and we know we're already in a litigious society. Right. So, what's going to happen after that? So I think that all those things are looked at as well, but it's very hard with the internet to regulate certain things, and you can understand the argument on both sides, but it's an interesting decision.
Now, there was another one dealing with the EEOC, and the thing I find interesting about the EEOC is that a lot of people have complained that understanding how to actually file the proper paperwork and doing it within a time frame has been an issue for them. Also, that it was the last decision that I remember coming down based on any type of EEOC complaint was the one I told you about last night, talking about a woman who was working for a particular auto company, and that for 20-something years she was being underpaid by compared to her male counterparts, and supposedly her thing was like this is a continuous thing, and so she filed it within this period of time. But the Supreme Court in their ruling previously had said that it had to be filed at the time of the offense. So I was like, I really couldn't understand that. They recognized her being discriminated against and being underpaid, but how do you say that she should have filed it 20 years ago?
Yeah, and that's kind of a pet peeve of mine. When you're dealing with issues as important as justice, I mean, I understand there's deals in the legal system where, a murderer gets off because they give up the bigger fish or whatever the case is. So things happen, but when you're dealing with issues of justice or issues that affect us, where especially an EEOC complaint where you're supposed to be trying to make sure that there's enough diversity within the workplace, that no one's being discriminated against, I think technicalities of that nature should be examined carefully, because if you're going to, there's reasons for rules and regulations, but if this woman was supposed to file certain paper, and then there was a gray area like there are in contracts where they say, well, we look at the interpretation and maybe this is too gray, we're going to go on the side of the person where justice is going to be served. I think something like that should happen in those cases as well. Again, even with the EEOC, I think anytime we're dealing with major issues, whether it's criminal or EEOC, etc., there should be mechanisms in place administratively to make sure that these things are filed properly, because I think in that case that woman had actually approached the EEOC because she'd given them permission to use her name if it went into legal proceedings, But obviously if you're working for the company, you don't want them to know about it until you're actually within the mix of the entire situation. But I think that administratively, we need to make sure that those things don't fall through the cracks on technicalities, because then you miss the whole purpose of having the agency that you have, which is to prevent discrimination.